What if everything the galaxy believed about humans was terrifyingly wrong? For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council had maintained perfect order across 847 worlds. Every species had been catalogued, ranked, and placed in their proper tier of the cosmic hierarchy. The Zephyrians, with their plasma manipulation, sat at the apex. The crystal-bodied Nixari controlled commerce with their mathematical minds. The shape-shifting Vorthak dominated espionage and infiltration. And then there were humans, recently discovered, barely evolved primates from a backwater planet called Earth. Physically weak, short-lived, lacking any supernatural abilities. They were classified as Tier 9, harmless, suitable only for manual labor and simple tasks. The Council xenobiologists even joked that humans were so pathetically non-threatening they could be kept as pets. But the Council's perfect system had one fatal flaw. They had never encountered a species that grew stronger through adversity, that turned trauma into fuel, that became more dangerous the more desperate they became. They had never met a species that didn't just survive extinction events, but emerged from them evolved and vengeful. The galaxy was about to learn that there's a difference between being harmless and choosing to be peaceful. And when humanity's true nature finally surfaced, it would shatter everything the Council thought they knew about power, survival, and what it truly means to be the apex predator in a universe full of monsters. The mistake wasn't underestimating humans. The mistake was giving them time to prepare. The observation deck of the Galactic Council's flagship Eternal Dominion hummed with quiet efficiency as Admiral Kethrix studied the holographic display floating before her crystalline form. The blue-green planet rotating slowly in the projection looked unremarkable. A simple world orbiting a young yellow star in one of the galaxy's outer spiral arms. But this world had produced something that defied conventional xenobiological understanding. A species that had achieved interplanetary travel despite appearing to be nothing more than evolved mammals. "Admiral, the human delegation has arrived," announced Lieutenant Vex, his tentacles rippling nervously across his communication console. The cephalopod officer had overseen first contact protocols for over 2 centuries, but something about these humans made him uneasy. Kethrix turned her attention to the main viewport where a small crewed vessel approached their massive dreadnought. The human ship was laughably primitive, held together with metal alloys and chemical propulsion systems that most civilized species had abandoned millennia ago. It looked more like a barely controlled explosion than a proper spacecraft. "Patch me through to the Council chambers," Kethrix ordered. "It's time to determine where these creatures fit in our hierarchy." The main chamber of the Eternal Dominion had been designed to intimidate. Soaring columns of pure energy supported a dome that displayed the swirling cosmos above, while representatives from the galaxy's most powerful species arranged themselves in tiers that reflected their evolutionary superiority. At the apex sat Overlord Zetharian, a Zephyrian whose body flickered between states of matter, pure energy crackling around his form. "Bring in the specimens." Zetharian's voice resonated through multiple dimensions, causing the air itself to vibrate with power. The human delegation entered through massive doors that dwarfed them completely. 3 figures in simple environmental suits walked forward with measured steps, their faces hidden behind reflective visors. The lead human was a woman of average height, her movements precise but unremarkable. Behind her followed 2 men, one carrying what appeared to be a primitive recording device. Counselor Nephis, a towering insectoid with razor-sharp limbs, leaned forward in her crystalline throne. "State your designation and planetary classification for the record." The lead human reached up and removed her helmet, revealing a face that was startlingly ordinary. Brown hair, brown eyes, features that suggested neither particular intelligence nor any sort of supernatural ability. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but held none of the harmonic frequencies that indicated psychic potential. "I am Captain Sarah Chen of Earth. We come representing humanity in hopes of establishing peaceful relations with your council." A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through the assembled delegates. The Vorthak representative, currently wearing the form of a massive predatory bird, clicked his beak dismissively. "Peaceful relations? How refreshing. Most species we encounter attempt to demonstrate their worthiness through displays of power or superior technology." Captain Chen nodded politely. "We prefer dialogue to demonstration." Overlord Zetharian gestured, and a complex holographic interface materialized in the air. "Very well. Submit to standard classification protocols. We must determine your species' proper tier within our hierarchy." What followed was an exhaustive series of tests that had been refined over thousands of years. Physical strength assessments revealed that humans possessed only modest capabilities. Stronger than some species, weaker than most. Their reflexes were adequate but unremarkable. Mental examinations showed intelligence within normal parameters, though their mathematics seemed oddly focused on practical applications rather than theoretical abstractions. The psychic evaluation was where things became interesting, though not in the way anyone expected. Subject shows no measurable psychic emanations, announced Dr. Valix, the Nixari scientist overseeing the tests. His crystalline form pulsed with confusion. This is unusual. Most species demonstrate at least basic telepathic potential. Perhaps they're psychically null, suggested Counselor Nethys. Some species evolve natural immunity to mental influence.
No, Doctor,
Valix corrected, his crystal matrix flickering as he processed the data. Null species register as voids in psychic space. These humans simply don't appear to exist on that spectrum at all. It's as if their minds operate on entirely different principles. Captain Chen waited patiently throughout the examination, answering questions with calm precision. When asked about human conflict resolution, she described diplomatic processes. When asked about their military capabilities, she spoke of defensive measures and peacekeeping forces. Her answers painted a picture of a species that had somehow achieved interstellar travel through cooperation and careful resource management, rather than conquest or superior evolution. The final assessment came after 3 days of comprehensive testing. The Council's xenobiologists, anthropologists, and military analysts had reached their unanimous conclusion. Tier 9, Overlord Zatharian announced, his energy form solidifying slightly as he delivered the verdict. Subclassification: harmless agricultural species. Suitable for basic labor, resource extraction, and simple manufacturing tasks under proper supervision. The ranking meant that humans would be treated as a client species, protected but controlled, given technology and guidance in exchange for services to more advanced civilizations. It was actually a relatively generous classification for a newly discovered species. Captain Chen received the news with the same calm demeanor she had maintained throughout the process. We understand. What would be required of our people under this arrangement? Standard integration protocols, explained Counselor Vex, his tentacles weaving complex patterns as he accessed the relevant files. Your world will be divided into managed sectors. Advanced species will oversee development projects, scientific advancement, and cultural guidance. Your population will be provided with improved nutrition, medical care, and education in exchange for participation in approved work programs. How long would this arrangement last? Indefinitely, Zatharian replied. Few species ever advance beyond their initial classification. The hierarchy exists for the stability and prosperity of all galactic civilization. Quote, Captain Chen nodded slowly. And if we refused this arrangement? The question hung in the air like a challenge, though Chen's tone remained perfectly respectful. Several council members exchanged glances. It was rare for a newly contacted species to even consider refusing integration, especially when offered such generous terms. Refusal would be inadvisable, Councillor Nethys said carefully. Independent development often leads to conflict, environmental destruction, or technological disasters. The Council has a responsibility to prevent such outcomes. I see. Captain Chen replaced her helmet and gathered her small team. We'll need to return to Earth to discuss these terms with our leaders. When should we expect to provide our final answer? You have 1 standard year, Zatharian decreed. Use this time wisely. Consider the benefits of joining galactic civilization rather than struggling alone in the darkness between stars. As the human delegation left the chamber, the council members began discussing integration logistics. The humans seemed pleasantly compliant, unlikely to cause the sort of problems that some species created during their adjustment period. Their lack of psychic ability would actually make them ideal for certain types of work, since they couldn't be influenced by the mental emanations that sometimes affected other species. Admiral Kethrix watched the primitive human ship depart through the main viewport, already calculating the resources that would be needed for Earth's integration. It would be a straightforward process. Establish monitoring stations, introduce council technology gradually, begin population management protocols. Within a few decades, the humans would be just another client species, grateful for the guidance that had elevated them from their simple existence. Admiral. Lieutenant Vex approached with a data tablet. The deep space monitoring stations have detected unusual activity in several systems along the outer rim, energy signatures that don't match any known technology. Kethrix absorbed the information through her crystalline matrix. Investigate quietly. Deploy reconnaissance drones but maintain communication silence. We can't afford distractions during integration season. What none of them realized was that Captain Chen's calm demeanor hadn't been resignation. It had been assessment. For 3 days, she had observed Council technology, political structures, military capabilities, and psychological profiles of key leadership figures. She had noted the casual dismissal of lesser species, the rigid hierarchy that left no room for advancement, and the assumption that superior technology automatically granted superior wisdom. The human ship's primitive appearance had been carefully calculated. Its crude construction had masked sensor arrays that operated on principles the Council scientists wouldn't recognize for another 1,000 years. The recording device carried by one of Chen's companions had mapped the entire structure of the Eternal Dominion, identifying critical systems, defensive weak points, and command protocols. Most importantly, Chen had confirmed what human intelligence agencies had suspected from their first observations of galactic civilization. The Council's power came from technological superiority and species specialization, but their military thinking had grown stagnant after millennia of easy dominance. They had never faced an opponent that could adapt, improvise, and evolve new strategies in real time. As the human ship jumped to hyperspace using a drive system that their own scientists barely understood, Captain Chen opened a secure communication channel to Earth's military command. Classification confirmed as Tier 9, she reported to the assembled leaders back home. They want to integrate us as a client species within 1 year. And their capabilities? Asked General Morrison, his weathered face grim on the holographic display. Extensive but predictable. Their technology is advanced but standardized. Their tactics are refined but rigid. They've been fighting the same way for so long that they've forgotten how to adapt to new threats. Recommendations? Captain Chen smiled. And for the first time since entering Council space, she allowed her true feelings to show. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Give them exactly what they expect to see. Let them think we're complying with integration. Use the year they've given us to prepare. Prepare for what? To show them what happens when you try to cage a species that survived ice ages, supervolcanic eruptions, plague pandemics, and 2 world wars. They think evolution is about developing superior abilities. They're about to learn that the most dangerous evolution happens when a species faces extinction. The communication ended, and Chen turned to look out at the stars streaming past their ship. The Council had made their assessment based on careful observation and scientific analysis. They had tested human capabilities and found them wanting. They had catalogued human society and deemed it primitive, but they had made one critical error in their evaluation. They had observed humans during peacetime, when humanity's greatest strength lay dormant. They had never seen what humans became when someone threatened everything they loved. The galaxy was about to receive an education in the difference between a species that had evolved beyond conflict and one that had simply chosen to pursue peace from a position of overwhelming strength. The Council's perfect hierarchy was about to encounter something it had never faced before, a species that grew stronger not through genetic superiority or technological advancement, but through sheer, bloody-minded refusal to surrender. Back on Earth, military leaders, scientists, and engineers received Captain Chen's full report and began preparations for something that had never happened in recorded galactic history. A Tier 9 species was about to reject integration, declare independence, and prepare to fight the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever known. The Council had given humanity 1 year to consider their generous offer. Humanity intended to use every second of that time to prepare for a war that would redefine what it meant to be the apex predator in a universe full of monsters. After all, there was a reason that Earth was the only known planet where extinction events had consistently produced stronger species rather than eliminating life entirely. The Council was about to discover that they had just threatened the ultimate survivors of the ultimate crucible. And when humans stopped being peaceful, the galaxy would learn what true predators looked like. The war room beneath Geneva hummed with activity that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Representatives from every nation on Earth worked alongside engineers, military strategists, and scientists who had spent decades preparing for a scenario most people still believed was science fiction. The room's walls displayed a 3-dimensional map of local galactic space, dotted with red markers indicating Council monitoring stations and patrol routes. General Morrison stood at the Central Command table, studying reports that painted a picture of humanity's impossible task. The Galactic Council commanded technology thousands of years more advanced than Earth's, controlled resources from nearly 1,000 worlds, and possessed military forces that numbered in the trillions. By any rational calculation, humanity's chances of survival approached zero. Status report, Morrison ordered as Captain Chen entered the chamber, still wearing the simple clothes that had disguised her true role as Earth's most experienced xenocultural analyst. Integration timeline is proceeding exactly as predicted, Chen replied, activating a holographic display. Council advanced scouts have established monitoring stations at the edge of our solar system. They're cataloging our resources and population distribution, but maintaining minimal contact to avoid cultural contamination before formal integration begins. Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, Earth's leading expert on xenotechnology, looked up from her analysis station. The good news is that their monitoring tech is sophisticated but standardized. We've identified the frequency signatures and detection algorithms. The better news is that they're not looking for anything they don't expect to find. Meaning, they're monitoring for nuclear weapons, conventional military buildups, space-based defensive platforms, essentially the same things every other species tries to develop when first contacted. They're not scanning for the technologies we've actually been working on. Morrison nodded grimly. The truth was that humanity's real military research had taken directions that no other galactic species had ever pursued, precisely because no other species had faced the same evolutionary pressures that had shaped human development. While other civilizations had focused on perfecting energy weapons, psychic abilities, and force field technology, humanity had been forced to become experts in something far more dangerous: adaptive warfare. What's the status on Project Lazarus? Morrison asked. Dr. Raj Nakamura, whose appearance as a mild-mannered physicist concealed his role as director of humanity's most classified weapons program, consulted his tablet. Prototypes are complete and undergoing final testing. We've managed to weaponize human immune system responses and apply the principles to our military technology. The concept would have seemed insane to the Council's military planners. Conventional galactic warfare involved superior firepower, advanced defensive systems, and overwhelming technological advantage. But humanity had evolved in an environment where survival meant adapting to threats that couldn't be overpowered through brute force. Viruses, bacteria, parasites, and diseases had shaped human development in ways that created capabilities other species had never needed to develop. Show them, Morrison ordered. Nakamura activated a sealed testing chamber visible through reinforced windows. Inside, a small metallic device about the size of a briefcase sat on a laboratory table. This is a Mark 7 adaptive defense system. It appears to be a simple electronic device, but embedded within its structure are millions of microscopic machines based on enhanced human white blood cell designs. He pressed a control, and a beam of energy, calibrated to match Council plasma weapon signatures, struck the device. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the device began to change, its surface shifting and reforming as the microscopic machines analyzed the attacking energy pattern and developed countermeasures in real time. First exposure, Nakamura explained as the energy beam intensified. The system takes damage but learns. Now watch what happens when we hit it with the same type of energy again. The second beam struck the device and simply disappeared, absorbed and redirected by the modified structure that had literally evolved a defense in minutes. The system doesn't just resist the attack, it adapts to become immune to that specific threat pattern. And the adaptation can be transmitted to other units in the network. General Morrison smiled coldly. Galactic military doctrine assumes that once you've developed a superior weapon, it remains superior. They've never faced an enemy whose defenses could evolve faster than their weapons could be upgraded. But technology was only part of humanity's preparation. The real advantage lay in something the Council had never encountered, a species that had evolved to thrive under impossible odds. Captain Chen pulled up another display showing population statistics. We've been studying Council integration procedures for other species. The pattern is always the same. They arrive with overwhelming force, demonstrate their superiority, and wait for the species to surrender. Resistance is typically broken within days or weeks because other species recognize futility when faced with impossible odds. And humans? Humans are the only known species that consistently becomes more dangerous when facing impossible odds. Our entire evolutionary history is a series of near-extinction events that we not only survived but emerged from stronger than before. The Council has never encountered a species that treats desperation as a tactical advantage. Sarah Kim, Earth's leading expert on human psychology and warfare, joined the conversation. We've been analyzing their military records. Council forces have never faced an enemy that employs what we consider standard guerrilla tactics, asymmetric warfare, or adaptive strategy. Their battles are essentially formalized duels between opposing technologies. Explain. When two galactic civilizations fight, they meet in space with their best ships and most advanced weapons. The side with superior technology wins, and the losing species accepts integration rather than face total destruction. It's actually quite civilized. Morrison nodded. But humans didn't evolve in a civilized environment. Exactly. We evolved in an environment where survival meant outwitting predators that were bigger, stronger, and better armed. We learned to use tools, terrain, and intelligence to defeat enemies that should have been impossible to overcome. Most importantly, we learned that the key to winning an impossible fight is to change the rules. The war room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Galactic Council was preparing for a conventional integration scenario, expecting either immediate surrender or a brief futile resistance that would end with humanity accepting their place in the cosmic hierarchy. They had never faced a species that would view their overwhelming advantages as merely the opening parameters of a problem to be solved. Phase 2 status? Morrison asked. Infiltration teams are in position, Chen reported. We've managed to place operatives on 17 different council worlds using their own integration programs. Our people are posing as primitive human laborers being relocated for work assignments. This had been perhaps the most audacious aspect of humanity's preparation. While the council was preparing for integration, human volunteers had undergone months of preparation to pose as early colonists, allowing themselves to be transported to council worlds where they could observe, learn, and position themselves for operations that would begin only if diplomacy failed. The volunteers understand they're likely on one-way missions? Chen's expression hardened. They volunteered anyway. Every single one of them has family back on Earth. They understand what's at stake. Dr. Hawthorne looked up from her analysis station with an expression of grim satisfaction. I've been studying the Council's infrastructure systems. They've been stable for so long that they've optimized for efficiency rather than security. Their power grids, communication networks, and transportation systems all operate on standardized protocols that haven't been updated in centuries. Vulnerabilities? Massive ones, but only if you approach them from directions they're not expecting. Their systems are hardened against external assault and technological attack, but they're completely vulnerable to what we might call biological infiltration. She activated a display showing the internal structure of a council space station. Their life support systems are designed to accommodate hundreds of different alien physiologies, which means they're incredibly complex but also incredibly predictable. A human with the right knowledge and equipment could shut down an entire station by introducing biological agents the systems were never designed to filter. The plan that had emerged over months of preparation was unlike anything in the history of galactic warfare. Instead of meeting the Council's strength with strength, humanity would use their assumptions against them. Council forces expected to face desperate but conventional resistance from a primitive species. Instead, they would encounter an enemy that had spent months studying their weaknesses, infiltrating their infrastructure, and preparing to wage war according to rules they had never seen before. Timeline? Morrison asked. Integration deadline is 6 weeks away, Chen replied. Council forces are already positioning for what they expect to be a peaceful transition. We've identified their command structure, infiltrated their support systems, and prepared our own forces for deployment. And if we're wrong? If our assessment of their capabilities or intentions is incorrect? The room fell silent again. Everyone present understood that they were gambling with the survival of humanity itself. If their analysis was wrong, if human adaptability wasn't enough to overcome the Council's technological superiority, if their strategy failed to account for some critical factor, then Earth would face annihilation. Dr. Kim spoke into the silence. General, I've spent my entire career studying human behavior under extreme stress. What we're planning has never been attempted before, but that's because no species has ever been in our position. We're not just fighting for our freedom, we're fighting for our right to exist as an independent species.
And that makes a difference?
Every simulation, every historical analysis, every psychological profile says the same thing. Humans don't just fight harder when facing extinction, we become something entirely different. The Council has observed us during peacetime, when we're cooperative, diplomatic, and reasonable. They've never seen what humans become when someone threatens our children. Morrison looked around the room at the faces of people who had spent months preparing for humanity's first interstellar war. Scientists who had abandoned their research to design weapons. Diplomats who had trained for combat operations. Military officers who had studied alien psychology and xenobiology. All of them united by a simple understanding. The galaxy was about to learn that there was a difference between a species that had evolved beyond conflict and one that had simply chosen peace from a position of strength. Final vote, Morrison said quietly. Operation Prometheus goes active in 6 weeks unless the Council withdraws their integration ultimatum. All in favor? Every hand in the room rose without hesitation. Then God help us all, Morrison murmured. Because in 6 weeks, humanity either wins its independence or we make sure the galaxy remembers that we didn't go quietly into extinction. Unknown to the war planners in Geneva, their conversation was being monitored by systems far more sophisticated than any human technology. But the monitoring was being conducted not by the Galactic Council, but by intelligences that had been watching the development of galactic civilization for millennia without revealing themselves. In a space station hidden in the dark matter streams between galaxies, beings of pure energy observed humanity's preparations with something approaching approval. They had seen countless species face integration by the Council. Most accepted their fate with resignation. A few fought brief, hopeless wars that ended in absorption or annihilation. But never before had they observed a species that responded to impossible odds by evolving new forms of warfare specifically designed to exploit their enemies' psychological and technological blind spots. Never before had they seen a civilization that treated near extinction as merely another environmental pressure to adapt to rather than a reason to surrender. Interesting. One of the energy beings communicated to its companions. This species appears to have retained the essential characteristic, the human survival trait, the refusal to accept that any situation is truly hopeless. They appear to believe that every problem has a solution if they're willing to pay the price to find it. The Council will not appreciate having their authority challenged. They may resort to total annihilation rather than accept resistance. Then we will finally see if this species possesses what the ancestors believed was necessary for true galactic citizenship. And if they fail, then they will join the countless other species that proved insufficient for the challenges ahead. But if they succeed, the conversation trailed off as the energy beings turned their attention back to the small blue planet where humanity was preparing for a war that would determine not just their own survival, but their worthiness to join the galaxy's true rulers when the time came for the next phase of cosmic evolution. The Council believed they were integrating a primitive species. The hidden observers knew they were witnessing something far more significant. The first test of whether humanity possessed the potential to eventually transcend the Council's limited understanding of what true power meant in a universe full of dangers the Council had never imagined. In 6 weeks, the galaxy would begin learning whether the humans were just another species to be catalogued and controlled, or something far more dangerous. A reminder of what all intelligent life could become if it refused to accept limitations imposed by others. The countdown to humanity's graduation exam had begun. The integration fleet that assembled at the edge of Earth's solar system was a sight that had convinced hundreds of species to surrender without firing a shot. 17 massive dreadnoughts formed the core of the formation, each one capable of sterilizing a planet's surface within hours. Surrounding them, thousands of support vessels created a three-dimensional maze of firepower that could eliminate any conceivable resistance. Admiral Kethrick stood on the command deck of the Eternal Dominion, her crystalline form reflecting the light of distant stars as she observed the primitive planet that had somehow required such an overwhelming show of force. The human response to their integration deadline had been unexpected. "Admiral!" Lieutenant Vex reported, his tentacles dancing nervously across his communication console. "We're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. Display it." The main screen shimmered, and Captain Sarah Chen appeared, standing in what appeared to be a simple room with no visible technology beyond the camera recording her. She wore the same unremarkable clothing she had worn during her visit to the Council, but something in her expression had changed. The respectful deference was gone, replaced by something that made even experienced military officers uncomfortable. "Admiral Kethrix," Chen began, her voice carrying the same calm tone but with an undertone that spoke of absolute confidence. "I bring greetings from the people of Earth and a response to your integration proposal." "Speak your terms of surrender," Kethrix replied, though something about Chen's demeanor suggested this wouldn't be the routine capitulation she expected. "On behalf of humanity, I formally reject the Galactic Council's authority over Earth and declare our intention to remain an independent species. We thank you for your offer, but must respectfully decline integration into your hierarchy." A stunned silence filled the command deck. In 3,000 years of expansion, no species had ever formally rejected Council integration when faced with overwhelming military force. The very concept seemed impossible. "Captain Chen," Kethrick said carefully, "I believe you misunderstand your situation. This fleet contains enough firepower to eliminate all life on your planet within hours. You have no defensive capabilities that could prevent this outcome. Perhaps you should reconsider your position." Chen's expression never changed. "We understand our situation perfectly, Admiral. The question is whether you understand yours." "I'm afraid I don't follow." "Admiral, How many of your crew members have been on shore leave in the past 6 months? The question seemed so random that Kethrix had to process it twice before responding. I failed to see the relevance of personnel scheduling to this situation. Humor me. Approximately how many? Lieutenant Vex consulted his records. Standard rotation protocols were followed for all Council worlds. Approximately 40% of all fleet personnel received shore leave during the preparation period. And how many human laborers and colonists were transported to Council worlds during that same period? A cold realization began forming in Kethrix's mind. Are you suggesting? I'm stating facts, Admiral. For 6 months, your integration protocols have been transporting humans throughout Council space. Your security procedures are designed to detect weapons, technology, and traditional threats. They're not designed to identify individuals whose bodies have been modified to become weapons. Chen paused, allowing the implications to sink in. Every human currently on a Council world volunteered for a mission they knew was likely one way. Each of them carries within their bloodstream biological agents specifically designed to target the life support systems of your space stations and colony ships. The command deck erupted into activity as officers scrambled to contact installations throughout Council space. But Chen wasn't finished. Your communication networks are quite impressive, Admiral. Instantaneous contact across vast distances, quantum-encrypted channels, standardized protocols that have remained unchanged for centuries. Very efficient. Also very predictable, warning signals began flashing across the Eternal Dominion's displays. Communication links with Council installations were failing in sequence, creating a pattern that spread across known space like a virus.
What have you done?
Kethrix demanded. We've introduced chaos into a system that was optimized for order, Chen replied. Your infrastructure is incredibly advanced, but completely inflexible. When a single component fails, the system automatically reroutes around it. But when thousands of components begin failing in carefully timed sequence, the rerouting protocols create cascading overloads that bring down entire networks. Chen's image remained steady as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Space stations going dark, colony ships losing life support, communication hubs going offline, transportation networks grinding to a halt. This is impossible, Admiral Kethrix breathed. A primitive species cannot bring down galactic civilization with biological weapons and system infiltration. You're absolutely right, Chen agreed. A primitive species couldn't do this. But we're not primitive. We're something you've never encountered before. A species that learned to wage war against enemies that were bigger, stronger, and better equipped than we were. The fleet's formation began to shift as reports continued pouring in. What had started as a simple integration operation was becoming something unprecedented in galactic history, a comprehensive assault on the foundations of Council civilization. But Chen still wasn't finished. Admiral, I need you to understand something important. Everything I've just described, the biological attacks, the system infiltrations, the network disruptions, those are defensive measures. They're designed to prevent your civilization from destroying Earth in retaliation for our rejection of integration. Defensive measures?
We needed to ensure that this conversation could take place without the threat of immediate annihilation hanging over it.
Now that your ability to destroy us has been temporarily neutralized, we can discuss the real situation. Chen stepped to one side, and the camera's view expanded to show the room she was standing in. It wasn't the simple chamber it had appeared to be. Instead, it was a command center that rivaled anything on a Council dreadnought, staffed by humans working at control stations that displayed real-time information from across known space. Admiral, meet the real human military command. While you were observing our primitive technology and harmless agricultural society, we were studying your civilization, analyzing your weaknesses, and preparing for a war that was never supposed to happen. The displays behind Chen showed tactical information that made Admiral Kethrix's crystalline form flicker with disbelief. Fleet positions, defensive installations, resource allocation networks, command hierarchies, every detail of Council military operations was laid out with perfect accuracy. For 6 months, your people have been interacting with humans who were gathering intelligence, mapping your systems, and identifying the critical points where pressure could bring down your entire civilization. The biological attacks and system infiltrations weren't our primary weapons. They were cover for something much more significant. Chen activated a control, and the displays shifted to show something that defied everything Admiral Kethrix thought she knew about warfare. You've spent 3,000 years perfecting technology-based combat, superior weapons, advanced defenses, overwhelming firepower. But technology can be countered with better technology. What you've never faced is an enemy that wages war on a completely different level. The screens now showed psychological profiles, cultural analysis reports, and behavioral prediction models for every major species in the Council hierarchy, but more disturbing were the real-time monitoring systems that displayed current emotional states, decision-making patterns, and psychological vulnerabilities of key Council leadership figures. We've been studying not just your technology, Admiral, but your psychology. Your species has been peaceful for so long that you've forgotten how to think like predators. Your military strategies are based on technological superiority rather than adaptive tactics. Most critically, your entire civilization is built on the assumption that rational beings will choose survival over principle when faced with impossible odds. Chen smiled, and for the first time, Admiral Kethrick saw the expression that had terrified every predator that had ever hunted humans. It was the look of an apex predator that had just realized its prey was trapped. But humans aren't rational, Admiral. We're something far more dangerous. We're a species that has consistently chosen principle over survival, that has made impossible odds irrelevant through sheer refusal to accept defeat. The command room behind Chen began displaying new information, fleet movements, resource allocations, technological developments that had been hidden until this moment. Humanity hadn't just been preparing defenses, they had been preparing for total war. The biological attacks will continue until your installations surrender or are abandoned. The network disruptions will spread until your communication systems collapse entirely. Your fleet can destroy Earth, but doing so will only accelerate the collapse of Council civilization. Admiral Kethrix finally found her voice. What do you want? Recognition of humanity as an independent species with full sovereignty over our territory. Withdrawal of all Council monitoring systems and integration protocols. Most importantly, we want the galaxy to understand that the age of forced integration is over. The Council will never accept such terms. Other species will demand the same independence. Our entire civilization would collapse. Then perhaps it's time for your civilization to evolve, Admiral. The galaxy is full of species that accepted integration because they believed survival was more important than freedom. But there are other species out there who might make different choices if they knew resistance was possible. Chen paused, allowing her words to sink in. We're not trying to destroy your civilization, Admiral. We're trying to force it to grow. A galactic community based on voluntary cooperation is stronger than an empire built on technological intimidation. For long moments, the only sounds on the command deck were the alarms signaling the continued collapse of Council infrastructure. Admiral Kethrix realized she was facing something that no military academy had prepared her for, an enemy that fought not to conquer, but to transform the fundamental assumptions of galactic civilization. And if the Council chooses to continue this conflict, then you'll learn what happens when a species that survived extinction events for millions of years decides to fight for its survival. We've shown you what we can do with 6 months of preparation and a few thousand volunteers. Imagine what we'll become if you force us to treat this as a true war for survival. The transmission ended, leaving Admiral Kethrix staring at a blank screen, while her command staff worked frantically to assess the true scope of humanity's assault on Council civilization. Reports continued flooding in from across known space. Installation after installation going dark, networks failing in cascade patterns, transportation systems grinding to a halt, and most disturbing of all, signs that other species were beginning to ask questions about their own integration. Inspired by humanity's unprecedented resistance. Admiral, Lieutenant Vex reported quietly, we're receiving communications from 17 different member species requesting clarification of their integration status. They want to know if renegotiation is possible. Admiral Kethrix felt a profound shift in her understanding of the situation. This hadn't been a simple military operation that had gone wrong. It had been a trap specifically designed to demonstrate that the Council's power was built on assumption rather than absolute reality. The humans had calculated that the Council's response to resistance would be to bring overwhelming force to bear on Earth. They had used that predictable response to concentrate Council military assets in one location, while their real assault targeted the infrastructure that made Council civilization possible. But more importantly, they had used the conflict to send a message to every species in the galaxy. Resistance was possible. Independence was achievable, and the Council's authority existed only as long as species chose to accept it. Orders, Admiral? Lieutenant Vex asked. Admiral Kethrix looked out at the blue-green planet that had somehow engineered the first successful challenge to Council authority in 3 millennia. The logical response was to destroy Earth and send a clear message about the consequences of resistance. But doing so would only prove that the Council's authority was built on fear rather than legitimate leadership. Signal the fleet to maintain position, but take no aggressive action, she ordered. Open a channel to Council leadership. They need to understand that we're not dealing with a simple integration resistance. We're facing something that could transform galactic civilization itself. As the communication went out, Admiral Kethrix reflected on the uncomfortable truth that the humans had forced her to confront. The Council had created a stable galactic civilization through technological superiority and forced integration. But stability based on intimidation was inherently fragile, vulnerable to any species that refused to accept the fundamental assumptions on which it was built. The humans hadn't just resisted integration. They had demonstrated that the entire Council system was vulnerable to species that thought differently, fought differently, and valued different things than the established galactic community. Across the galaxy, other species were already learning about humanity's resistance, and for the first time in 3,000 years, they were beginning to ask whether the Council's authority was truly absolute or simply unchallenged. The war that had begun as a simple integration operation had become something far more significant, the first step in forcing galactic civilization to evolve beyond the rigid hierarchy that had defined it for millennia. In their hidden observation station, the energy beings that had watched galactic civilization develop for eons observed humanity's performance with growing approval. Impressive, one communicated. They've demonstrated not just the ability to resist superior force, but the wisdom to use resistance as a tool for positive transformation. The test continues. The Council's response will determine whether this species has truly transcended the limitations that have constrained galactic development. And if they pass, then perhaps it is time to reveal to the galaxy that the Council's hierarchy has always been merely the first level of a much larger cosmic community. A community that has been waiting for species that could prove themselves worthy of true independence. The countdown to humanity's final examination had begun. The galaxy was about to discover whether the age of forced integration was truly over, or whether humanity's resistance would spark something even more transformative, the evolution of galactic civilization itself into something worthy of the challenges that awaited beyond the stars.